Hello and welcome to another episode of the Motogp Xtra podcast. I'm Rhys, so joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is my co-host Dill. Now, this US weekend threw up pretty much everything from warm-up lap crashes to mechanical gremlins and everything in between. So we should probably get straight into it. Now, one of the occurring themes throughout the weekend was actually the track conditions, both with the weather and the actual track itself. So take it away, Dill. What were the riders saying about the circuit this weekend?
Since Formula 1 has been going here along with GP, they've year on year made the track worse for us. If you think like a carpet, when you push a carpet, how it kind of creates ripples, it's exactly what they've done to the surface. Never mind that Kota is built on an old kind of bogland, so the surface does kind of erode and actually collapse. So year on year, each time they go there, it gets worse and worse. It's been something that's been said for the last 5 years. Every year, they are going to do this, they're going to do that. We get there, riders complain Friday, straight away the conditions aren't good enough. In the end of the back straight, I believe it's turn 11, there's a patch that looks like you would see it on like a national road in Ireland or the UK, where it just looks like they've quickly put a bit of a tar down it. It looks horrific, and it's caused crashes in all three classes in every session throughout the weekend. It's just ridiculous, the conditions, really. It was a really poor display for Texas. I think me and Rhys were talking during the weekend. I think it's just a bit of a flex, like, well, we have the light or the contract for GP. We don't really need to do the work for it. And I'm quite adamant that we shouldn't be going back there after what we've seen today, judging on some weird crashes, some horrible injuries, warm-up lap crashes. There's just so much going on. Tracks in such bad condition. Overall attendance numbers are far down, probably the worst we've seen in America in a long time. So overall, other than the on-track stuff, there wasn't much anything decent around the Texas weekend. It was pretty poor overall for the organisers' image anyway.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't great, and you make a good point of every year it's the same thing. And I guess at this point, the organisers are like, well, the riders complain every year, but they still race the race. They still come every year. So maybe they are getting a little bit complacent with that, because it was terrible. Like you say, at the end of the back straight into turn 12, there was that massive ripple. And you could see it. When you can see it on the camera, you cannot believe how bad it must be on the bike. Like, it's unbelievable. I'm surprised they actually went ahead with it being that bad, because it wasn't like it was just a bump offline or just a bump somewhere. Like, it's a massive ripple in the middle of the track on the racing line, where you're also trailing a bit of brake as well at that point. It was a recipe for disaster, and as we saw, there were quite a few crashes over the weekend. So yeah, it was terrible. It did seem like in a few areas it wasn't as bad as we've seen in previous years. I seem to remember the long sort of right-hander towards the end of the lap a couple of years ago, like you could visibly see a lot of like massive holes sort of in that, and that seemed to not be the case this year. That seemed to be a bit better, but yeah, you constantly see the bikes bumping all the time. Like, it is absolutely a terrible track, and to be honest, I really don't envy the riders having to ride around it, because it does seem like a pretty dangerous one. But yeah, in terms of track conditions, that's pretty much it. Riders complaining, organisers not doing much about it, and I think you're probably right. Maybe it is time that they change their mind and don't go here. But it would be a shame to lose the USGP. But again, I suppose if they're not getting the attendance figures, then that's what happens to, quite a few other Grand Prix that they've dropped off the calendar over the years. I mean, Brno is a good example that for surfacing reasons, they didn't get the track resurfaced, they stopped going. So that was a staple on the calendar. So, it can happen to any track. So maybe it could very well happen to Kota next year if they don't sort it out. But they kind of have to go for Formula 1. So maybe they will actually have to resurface a few bits for the cars as well. But enough about the track conditions. We'll head into Moto 3, and we'll start off with a rather bizarre incident, something that actually came up later on in the weekend again afterwards. But we'll talk about this first one. Josh Whatley crashing on the warm-up lap. You don't see that very often, do you, Dilly? It doesn't happen very often. I think the last time I can sort of remember it happening is maybe Mugello 2021, where like Bastianini hit up the back of Zarco, or was it Zarco on the back of Bastianini? I can't remember, as someone braked on the formation lap, but it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, we were sitting down with my girlfriend watching the sprint race, and as the warm-up lap was going on, she asked me, has everyone ever crashed on the warm-up lap? And of course I listed off the riders, Rossi, Stoner. I went on, there's a load of riders who have done it, but it's a massive X next to your name if you've done it. When like Josh Whatley,
Rossi, Stoner.
Yeah, not bad company, exactly. So there's some top riders have done it. It's just you never really get the full story, because as you'll get to later with Dixon, in my notes here I have bike or rider question mark, just because we're not going to find out whether it was him or whether it was the bike, whether it was the tyres. But back to Watley, because he's in a lesser team and he's at the back of the grid, we're not going to get like a live kind of a press release saying what's going to happen. It's kind of going to just fade into distance, so we don't really know what happened. You just see him slide off in the back of shot as they come into the final sector on the warm-up lap. Not good enough, really. You shouldn't really be crashing on a warm-up lap. It's not good. It doesn't look good for the sport, and it's not good for you either, crashing. He ended up retiring. He got on the bike, came back into the pits. Too much damage. Now, maybe I could give the lad credit. Maybe there was damage to the bike beforehand. Maybe there was something wrong and that caused the crash. But again, we don't know at the moment. But just, it didn't look good for Watley, and it happened 2 times in 2 races. It was pretty strange. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because you don't see it for years, and then you see it happen twice in one day in 2 different races. And it was, I guess maybe you could say that the surface played a part in it, but obviously we don't really know what caused either of those crashes. I think it was turn 15 that Watley came off at, which is, it is a bit of a nasty left-hander, but even still, you know, on the formation lap, you shouldn't really on that much on the limit, or maybe he wasn't pushing enough. That could also be it, because that also can cause crashes occasionally. But like you say, we probably won't ever find out, with them being sort of a team and a rider more towards the back of the field. But speaking of the field then, there was quite an early gap in the race. So usually in Moto3, you get everything very, very compact. But Texas, just the nature of the track, again, the surface really does make the rider matter so much more than the bike at this track. And it allowed the gaps just to form absolutely immediately. So you had the front guys, they were sort of coming through like sort of turn 9, 10, and you could see some of there was a massive gap back to a group going through the snake after like 2 or 3 laps. It was crazy. I mean, again, the laps are kind of distorted because it's such a long circuit, so maybe a gap after 3 laps is at the same distance as like 5 laps at another track or something like that. But even still, there were some strangely early gaps in the race, wasn't there? It seemed like the more experienced guys definitely getting to the front and pulling away.
Yeah, it's kind of like Phillip Island in a way. In Phillip Island, they can't be grasped because it's down to the bike being not as much of a kind of holding back. It's the rider's track. A lot of these tracks that are the rider's tracks can have these gaps, but unfortunately it's kind of backwards in Texas. The riders make the difference because the track is so bad and it's so unfit for racing on that, like, it does, certain riders can deal with it better than others, and that's why we get these kind of weird gaps. But early in the Moto 3 race, when you're seeing gaps, you know for the rest of your day your racing is going to be pretty slim. Big gaps early, they only got bigger. There was groups throughout the field. Even the racing, like when we had 6 or 7 in the top group, it was usually 6 at most points. They were lining stern, they weren't passing each other, there was no dive bombs. It was like they were afraid to make a mistake. They were all quite reservative coming through most of the race. It wasn't till the last, we'll say, 5 laps. I can't lie, I was kind of dozing off, which is really rare in a Moto 3 race. So bit of a weird one, really. Not really sure what to say. Again, I kind of blame the track for it, because Moto 3 is never boring. It's never calm and collected in a tactical Moto 2 style race, but it was today, up until about 4 laps to go.
Yeah, it was a strange one, because I think the slipstream didn't seem to have much of an effect here. I think it was due to the fact they had a tailwind on the long back straight, so they weren't really able to slipstream each other either, which I think sort of stopped the overtakes, because Kota, it's a pretty difficult track to pass. It's very one line as it is. I mean, you can take different lines through sort of the S section, for example, but you can't pass really in an S section. It's very difficult because of the way you have to sort of set the bike up through there in terms of the lines you take. But then also, again, down to the bumps, down to the conditions, there's no point risking a crash, you know, going for a pass when there's like 12 laps to go or something like that. So, yeah, there wasn't a lot of overtakes, like you say. It was a bit of maybe not a snooze, but it was definitely a bit of a more boring Moto3 race, not quite the fairing, bashing action that we are used to, until we did get to 4 laps to go, and that's when it really started to kick off. And it started off really with Sasaki and Masia overtaking each other a couple of times, and then, well, it sort of all went wrong for Sasaki, didn't it?
Yeah, at that point of the race, I just kind of sat up because I knew 4 laps to go, it's going to get interesting now. And then, but half a lap later, Sasaki throws himself to the moon. It reminds me of Dennis Fadje, when someone you know is a championship favourite, he has the speed and gets to the race and crashes again 2 weeks in a row. He's done that now. Pretty disappointing.
Same kind of crash too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of maybe a little bit trigger happy, a bit he doesn't seem to have the composure. And again, last year he had a bit of this, but the fact that last year he got injured a few times, or a lot of crashes, injuries, and that's kind of got in his way. And the fact that he wasn't there throughout the season, couldn't put a championship chance together, and could look like, judging from the first 3 rounds, that it could be the same for this season, unfortunately, from Saki. Even though he's quite quick, he just doesn't seem to have the race management that he needs. Like to be fair, if it happens on the last lap, you kind of go, look, he was giving it everything, but like there was 5 laps to go at that point when he did crash. You're kind of at that point, you're really just kind of going, right, I just need to get myself the last 2 laps, and then I need to be in a position to go and do what I need to do. So it was a bit of a weird one. Again, I guarantee if you ask him, he was like, the track conditions so bad, I did nothing wrong, the bike just snapped and went over the bars. And he probably has a point. It probably is a bit of the track position condition again, but unfortunately for him, that put him out of the race. It also put Messia out into the long lap area, and then he probably set one of the fastest laps I've ever seen on a Moto3 bike, and he had caught him again by the end of the lap into that sector. So then we had Messia, Diego Moreira, Ortola, Artigas, and Holgado was just at this point starting to just fade away in the back. So we had a battle between kind of a lot of your favourites really, and my money straight away was on the Leopard man Messia, but he kind of got there, made an overtake, and then kind of got stuck in that Moto3 battle of I pass you, you repass me in a corner of time. So it was just crazy, and to be fair, it was a good little finish and a great result for Ortola.
Yeah, it was great for Ortola, wasn't it? Because he had the massive moment at the start of the race. How he stayed on the bike, I have no idea. So he sort of flicked it over to go for the right of turn 2. He must have just put his back wheel on the white line a little bit, it looked like, sort of on the curb and the white line. And we'd seen a few crashes throughout the weekend at that corner doing that very thing. I think Oliveira did it. I think Martin did it as well. A couple of different crashes there. Just supposed to stay on, putting right back to the back. He was the fastest guy throughout the whole race, wasn't he? He was unbelievable, making passes so easily. And then obviously he got into that lead group. He sat there for a while. Then sort of the path was just made for him as Sasaki crashes. Messia has to go off the track. He's then in the lead. And then he has the attack from Moreira. I really did feel for Moreira, to be fair, because he was leading going into like the halfway point of the lap and ended up in 4th. Bless him. It wasn't quite to be for Moreira on this occasion, but it was a fantastic ride from Ortola. It's one of those rides where you're like, wow, this kid is good. Like, because Austin as well, it is a strange track, so you can't read too much into results that have happened here, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later with Moto2 and MotoGP. But yeah, it was still a fantastic ride from the kid, and he really, really did deserve the win. Yeah,
he was like his save alone was worthy of the win. Like how he ever stayed on, like he touched the line, nearly goes over the top, runs off the track in turn 2, then has to rejoin in P18, I believe. And then at that point, you're like, oh, the race win is probably gone. You kind of just forget about him. He's like, yeah, he's never in the race now. He's back there with the mid-table riders. So you completely put him out of your head. At this point, then you're thinking, right, what can Messia and Sasaki do at the front? Will one of them have a breakaway lead? And then you just completely rule Ortola out. Then little by little, oh, he's P11, geez, that's a good recovery, he might still get a top 10. And he's P8, and he's P5, and then he's in the group, and then he's just sitting there, and you're like, well, surely he's burned his tyre up, surely there's no way now he's going to keep this pace up. And he gets himself into 3rd, then the 2 boys at the front have an instant, and he takes lead, and you're like, there's no way he can win it. And he actually brings it home and wins it, in fairness to him. He did get passed by the Brazilian, but just a small mistake from Moreira, and that cost him. Ortola took his chance, and to be fair, it deserved to win because he was the quickest, and I would have been gutted if he had crashed at the start because he had such good pace, and it's a good victory, and hopefully he could spur him on to better things for the rest of the season.
Yeah, hopefully he will be one of those that sort of takes that and has a really good run of form, because we've seen a couple of bright moments from him over the last year or so, but I think this is the round where he's really, turned up and he's like, I'm here to win. So hopefully Ortola can try and carry that through into the European season. But we'll move on to Moto2 now then, and obviously we mentioned at the start of Moto3 there was another warm-up lap crash, and that was for Jake Dixon in Moto2, and a strange one coming through turn 9, I believe it's turn 9, and he sort of got on the throttle, and then you kind of heard the bike sort of just start to go, like almost as if it just went over a bump or something. Something strange seemed to happen with the bike as he got on the throttle, whether it was a bump, whether it was his mistake because he cut the curb, whether it was a mechanical issue, we're not really sure, but it sort of threw him over the top. And down he was, and that was him out because the bike was too damaged to get back on.
Yeah, it was a pretty big crash, really, and because it's the warm-up lap, you get these helicopter shots of them all going round, the commentators, they have the attendance on screen. It's something that like they don't really focus too much on. Then they go to like usually the triple cam camera of the championship leader and the grid and the teams and all that, and they're never actually focused on what the riders are doing on the warm-up lap. It's kind of like the whole show they're building towards. So the footage we have is only coming over the crest where he's already crashed, so we don't know if he's touched the curb, if it was his own mistake, or what actually happened. And we have the onboard from his gyroscopic camera at the back of the bike. So again, judging from the audio, it's the bike does step out, it goes, it comes back, it goes, and he goes over the top. It's quite an aggressive crash. Bike barrel rolled a couple of times into the gravel. That was the end of his race. There was no way he was getting back up. The question I posed to you, do you reckon it was the bike error or rider error?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm to be honest, I'm just going to say I think it's rider error, to be honest with you. We saw other similar crashes like that over the weekend. We saw similar moments. Like, I don't think it's an egregious thing, but it's one of those things where like, I don't think he's really quite anticipated the bump. Perhaps because it's the warm-up lap, he's on a different line than he's been on all weekend, because he's not pushing and he's cut the bump he didn't know was there, and it's unsettled the bike, and maybe even sort of like flicked him a bit, and then he's flicked his wrist as he's come back down, and maybe too much throttle. I don't know, but yeah, I'll ask you the same question. Do you think it's bike or rider?
I'm still massively on the fence. I can't make my mind up.
You made me answer.
To be fair, and I will lean towards the rider, because until we have any further actual confirmation if there was a bike issue, or if it was some weird tire issue, or if it was the track, but I reckon the rider's on the bike. He should be good enough to stay on it for the warm-up lap. He had an interview during the Moto2 race, and he had some choice words to say that he's not an idiot. He knows how to ride a bike. He's never crashed on a warm-up lap before. Your point of him being slightly offline because it's a warm-up lap and he's kind of like just trying to get to heat the tires, make sure your brakes up to temperature, make sure everything is where it should be at, you're on the right engine map, everything. You could be slightly distracted. I can actually see that. So that was actually what swayed me towards rider error. The fact that he crashed on a warm-up lap, a lot of times you always think it has to be a bike mistake, because like these riders are paid big bucks to do what they do, and they are the best in the business. Now, obviously they crash when they're on the limit, but like they could ride around at that pace for forevermore, really, is the way I look at it. But again, you make a solid point about maybe offline on a different line, dirty part of the track. It is a really tight and twisty sector there, kind of one line, a lot of people touching the inside curb. Maybe he was just a touch wet. Again, if we had the outside camera footage, we'd probably know a lot more, because you can kind of tell by the bike's body language and what the bike has done to him. You kind of can tell if it was a mechanical or if it's just too much throttle, whatever. But I'm going to lead towards Dixon error, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it definitely could have been a bike error, and if it is, a whole man's up and say I've called it wrong. But he does have a bit of form, unfortunately, for throwing it at the fence, and almost the way you mentioned the interview, it seemed too defensive in a way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he was trying to say, I'm not an idiot, I don't crash on warm laps. If like maybe he feels a bit silly, I don't know. I mean, I suppose he probably would, even if it's a bike or what. You've not even made it to the race. So yeah, just one of those weird things. And to be fair, unlike the previous incident, I think we probably will maybe hear from it. Maybe he'll either admit it was his fault, or actually it's hard to say, because if it's a bike error, they probably won't say, because they don't say a lot of the time. So if he comes out and says it's his own fault, then we'll find that out. And if he doesn't, then it probably is a bike issue. But whatever, I guess we'll just have to see how that story pans out. But from one crash to an epic save, of course, we had Alonso Lopez. Wasn't picked up at all. Well, actually, we could talk about his race quickly. It wasn't a great race for him, unfortunately. He was pretty fast at the start, then had a lot of mistakes. Really started with this save that he had with the front end. He managed to, I don't know how he saved it. It was completely gone, so saved it on his elbow, sort of Marquez style. It came back into grip, and he stayed on the bike. And it was something that I don't think it was picked up, was it, at the time? It was just shown after the race. But yeah, it was a bit of a messy race for Lopez, but a good save nonetheless, and picked up some decent points. But I felt like he spent more time off the track than they did on it, to be honest.
Yeah, I was watching the race with him at my dinner, and I remember him coming through the snake section when he has the save. But you don't see, you see the, we'll say, kind of parallel to the snakes, so you can see them going through left, right, and they're focused on the two in front. And you just see his head and shoulders come into the shot, but he's completely offline. And I remember calling it, I was like, oh, he's wide, he's after messing up the snake, not knowing that he had had a massive save going right, and then the bike jumped and went. So basically, he missed the apex on the left side, we'll say. So you could see he was way further down the screen, we'll say, for where he should have been. And I could see he's like, oh, he's gone wide. He's obviously made a mistake, but no way did I imagine that he had lost the front, managed to resave it and go back. But after that, he dropped back from third back to about sixth, and then whether it was triumph issues, which will come to in a minute, there have been some false neutrals going down the box, some electrical issues. Every 2 or 3 laps, he ran off at turn 12 at the end of the back straight. He just ran straight off. And then the last where he didn't, he kind of like squared it off just on the curb to stay in the track limits. Usually a rider can get caught out into a corner like that. It is really difficult. But when you're doing it 6-7 laps out of a race, you start to think, surely there's something going on with the bike. He's a professional, right? Like, again, I go back to the integrity of a rider. They're not stupid. Like, they know how to deal with these things. Maybe it's just like something was engine-wise, not getting the engine braking he wanted, wasn't getting the downshifts as crisp. But in the box afterwards, he just looked bemused. He just didn't know what was going on with that bike. I'd imagine he had a good pace early, and just after he kind of got passed by the two in front, he just kind of struggled, and after that then went backwards. And I'd say he probably had more moments that we didn't see on camera. I'd say it was one of those races where he was probably glad to be even P7 or whatever he ended up finishing.
Yeah, you're probably right with that. He's probably had more moments and was glad to even finish the race. Makes me wonder whether maybe he had front tyre problems, like maybe it's overheated. You don't see it so much in Moto2. It's more of a MotoGP thing, of course, with the pressures and all the aero and the braking. But maybe if he had a massive save like that, maybe that had stressed the front tyre, and then obviously he was struggling then to get stopped for turn 12, and that's probably putting more heat through the tyre. So it could have been one of those things. But like you say, there's been a lot of issues with the Moto2 bikes. We may as well jump straight to that topic now, since we are talking about potential issues. And if you didn't know, obviously, it's been a problem it's been a problem since 2010, the gearboxes, really. You know, I know there were Hondas for most of that. Well, I don't know actually if it's most of that period now, but there were Hondas for a good amount of that period before they swapped to the Triumphs. And but the Moto2 gearbox has never been great. Are they like they're more like street boxes in a way? They're not.
That's pretty much what they are. They've always been, even with the Honda, and they were just kind of they were always called agricultural gearboxes because they were a really, really reliable semi-race engine, and then thrown a pretty kind of lame attempt at a gearbox onto it. So they always had these issues, and we thought when we went to Triumph that we would get a more clear picture, but even back as far as I remember during COVID, saw Sam Lowe's run on a couple of times and clash with some people, and they were always talking about how they get like into these weird neutrals between first and second, and it just takes a track like Coastal where you have so many second to firsts in a lap and then throw a 16 lap race. You'll just see it more often than not. Really, it does happen all the time. It will happen at Catalunya, it'll happen at Mugello. You just won't know about it because there might be one corner where it might catch out one person the whole weekend and you don't really pick up on it. But when there's 16 riders who've had multiple of it in the same corner, then it starts to make its way into light. But it's just a kind of a less professional gearbox, money saving gearbox you could call it, and that is kind of where your issue is at.
Yeah, so basically, obviously, it's not such a good gearbox, so you kind of get what's called a false neutral quite a lot, which is where you're trying to sort of shift down, or it can happen on the up, but it's usually on the downshift when you're trying to go down. Maybe at the end of the straight, you're trying to go down to first gear. The gearbox is first, neutral, second. So when you're trying to go from second to first, it's nice to engage as neutral instead, because it doesn't do a full click, because it's like half a click between first and second gear. That's where the neutral is. So a lot of the time they're getting these false neutrals, and then when you have that, you're out of control on the bike. You don't have the control anymore because you can't use the throttle or anything. The engine braking is completely gone when you're in neutral, so you just go straight on. You can't stop the bike very well anymore. So that's the main issue they're having with the gearboxes. That was happening. I think Sam Lowe said he had quite a few. I think he said he had like 3 on the way to the grid on the sighting lap. So that's not great when you get them on the sighting lap. Now, in fairness, Lowe's kind of he's probably had more than anybody else, I would say. I think is fair, or at least it's been reported on more. So maybe it is partially down to his riding style as well. Maybe he doesn't quite catch the lever enough, because it can be down to rider error. But then, like you say, maybe Lopez was getting quite a few there. Acosta got one. That's what cost him the lead initially when he was leading the race. He had a false neutral. But then those are the gearbox issues. So like I was saying, that's always been an issue. But then this season, there seems to be a new issue where the bikes are sort of cutting out. They're not really sure what's causing it, which is pretty scary. It's some sort of electronical issue, it seems. But quite a few different riders have been having issues throughout the whole season, even as far back as testing, Portimao, all these different things. In Argentina, you might have noticed the 2 American racing guys just randomly retired. That's because their bikes just cut out. Probably the most notable incident, though, was in qualifying. Iagora coming through the long right-hander, Jake Dixon right behind him. His bike just completely cut out right in front of Dixon. Could have been a pretty horrendous accident, that, because we've seen it go wrong before in plenty of classes where a bike's cut out and the guy behind's not been able to avoid. Fortunately, Agora was straight on it, sort of pulling out the way. Dixon was on it, so they were both okay. But yeah, it's a scary issue. They're even having an emergency meeting on Saturday night, I believe, to try and figure out what's causing it. So yeah, there seems to be quite a few issues with the Triumph bike at the moment. I'm hoping they can get that sorted because obviously the cutting out is probably a bigger issue, but also the false neutrals, they need to try and get on top of that as well, because both of them are pretty bad safety issues, to be honest.
Yeah, they could do it. We just redesign it like the GP bikes and most super bikes. You have to engage neutral by pressing a button and shifting at the same time. They'll have a gate in the gearbox that will basically not allow you to go into neutral by not engaging this some sort of hydraulic button. Moto 2, it's the cost reason is the only thing that's stopping that. It's been an issue. Like Moto 2 was brought in as the cheap, rugged, good racing, kind of that was the whole selling point of that. They were going to be standardized ECUs, standardized engines, 3 or 4 chassis, Dunlops up and down the grid, a durable tyre, doesn't blow up in GP, doesn't superbikes and everywhere else. And it was just brought in, everything will just be nice, cheap, it'll run, it will have some fun. But now we're getting to the point where I think the Triumph engines are showing up more for whatever reason. I remember when they switched to the Triumph engines, a lot of people are blowing them up on the downshifts as they were over revving. So again, that's a bit of more engine side, but again, there's a lot of times we're having issues with these downshifting of these bikes at the moment. So to be honest, I don't see it being rectified. It's one of those things that's been there, it's known, it's not something that they don't know how to fix. It's just I'd imagine whoever does make the gearboxes could pretty easily solve the issue, but I just don't think they want to spend the money developing it into all 25, 30 Moto 2 bikes and trying to run it overseas, and it will cost more money, and I think that's just where they're trying to cut corners. Personally, I think it's a bit stupid that they don't, because it is quite dangerous. We saw Sam Lowes in one of the Austria races. I think he hit, who did he hit now? I think was it Chantra? Yeah, into the back end.
I think Chantra and Navarro might have been.
It happened to Chantra last year here as well, I believe.
Yeah, Chantra did it to Sam last year.
Exactly.
It hit Austin, and then a couple of years before, Sam had done it to Chantra, and I think also Navarro might have been in that one too.
Yeah, that like you see it because it was a perfect example today with Pedro Costa. He comes in, he's backshifting, goes into neutral, the bike just goes completely quiet. You hear then a massive crunch as he basically forces it back into gear because he's kind of in between no man's land. The gears are kind of slightly in mesh, and then they mesh, and it sounds bad. It sounded horrible on board. Because like Rhys said, you lose your engine brake, and when it's in neutral, you've no kind of pull through the chain and through your drivetrain. So unfortunately, it's going to keep happening, and we could see a massive accident like we did back in 2020 with it. It's horrible to see. But in terms of the electrical issue, that's something that they just have to diagnose, the emergency meetings. It is quite scary. Everyone thought that Iagora lost the front and he saves on his elbow and he picks it up. But the fact that, like Jake said, he's like completely chopped the throttle, meaning like he completely closed it and sat the bike up. But the bike just completely stopped and cut out, lost all engine. It is quite scary when that happens, because the bike can actually lock on you like an old kind of two-stroke seizing. So it could be quite serious, and a serious incident if it went wrong in the wrong place. Like if that happened in the opening lap in the straight, like he will go backwards into the group, and that would just be catastrophic. So a couple of incidents here now we need to kind of get sorted mechanical wise. Usually we don't talk about the issues in any 3 classes, but small few issues creeping into Moto 2, and I'd like them to be addressed ASAP really.
Yeah, I think they do need to fix them. I'm sure they'll get on top of this electrical issue pretty quickly. I think they're already thinking that it's a certain component that a lot of the teams are using, because some teams haven't had any issues. I think Speed Up and IO, I think, are the only 2 that haven't had issues, supposedly. So maybe, I don't know whether they can really share what components they're using, because I guess they want to keep their advantage, but I guess when it comes to a safety reason, maybe they can look at a list and say, okay, we're not using that, so maybe it could be that or something like that. I suppose I don't have to say what they're using an alternative, but yeah, hopefully that could be resolved. But I'm sure they'll be pretty on it with something like that, because obviously that is a major safety issue. But of course, there was we did mention Acosta before there with his force neutral. He was leading the race till he got that. He ran wide, and then really a battle ensued between the two championship protagonists. Obviously, current championship leader Tony Arbolino took the lead after that incident, or was it Lopez for a little bit and then Arbolino? But either way, it ended up with Arbolino being in the lead of the race and Acosta behind him in second, and he was stalking him for a long time. Considering the fact that at Austin, the racing isn't particularly great, you don't tend to get, proper battles. It was actually a pretty intriguing race, wasn't it, for Moto2? It was pretty good with Arbolino leading. Acosta sort of sat on the back of him, and it was definitely one of those things where is he going to make the move? When is he going to do it? It was just a waiting game, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, a few times he pulled alongside him on the back straight, and you can just see that he broke and tucked back in. And Arbolino did say it in park form afterwards that he could actually hear him alongside him, and he knew it was going to be there, but he just said he had nothing really to defend him with. And when it happened, he actually went a couple of laps early, then made a mistake into the exact corner in turn 12 because he didn't have his marker of the fellow rider in front of him. So made the pass, lost the position, and then we're like, great, he now knows he's going to try it there. We thought we'd have a closer battle. I think over one lap, I think the Italian had the top end kind of overall advantage, but Acosta just seemed to have the racecraft and was able to spring it on Arbolino. Fabulous riding for both of them. Ultra clean. Both of them down to the wire. Arbolino never gave up even after being passed, and on the last lap had a couple of chances, but just Acosta rode the perfect defensive race. Very, very, very wise of where to put the bike, and he just gave nothing to Arbolino. And to be fair, Arbolino was there, he was ready for the opportunity, but it just never came. And it was a great battle, and I reckon this could be our two main championship rivals, a bit like a couple of years back when you had the two IO, Remy Gardner and Fernandez, Raul Fernandez going head to head. I think these are our two boys now for the championship.
Yeah, I think so, because if you look at the form, the pace, you kind of don't realise it because there was the season break. You're thinking, Arbolino's been pretty good, but Arbolino's won like most of the last few races, because if you go back to even like Thailand, basically from Thailand, he's won like I think like half the races that have happened or something like that. So it is quite a lot. Arbolino is on top form right now. Obviously, Acosta had actually a pretty good rookie year last year, all things considered, but now a fresh start, no injuries, things like that. He was always going to be the man to beat, and I think it is definitely going to be between the two of them. And Arbolino said as soon as he got back to Port Ferme, this isn't the end. This isn't the end. He's going to try and beat him next time. He's going to want to make sure he beats Acosta. And it'd be great to see them both go wheel to wheel a bit more, bar to bar throughout the season, because it was a great battle. Well played by Acosta. It really did show his class, really, the way he defended that, because there's nothing Arbolino could have done because Acosta didn't make a mistake. Acosta defended the inside. Arbolino, if he tried to then go any tighter, he would have just completely ran into him or just completely missed the corner. So there was nothing he could have done really to try and pass him in those last couple of corners. So, yeah, great killing battle in between the two of them. And like you say, I really hope that we see some more. But behind those two guys, there was one hell of a scrap for the podium. And it's a bit of a shame we didn't see so much of it. But, of course, we were focused on the leader. But then all of a sudden, Bo Benschneider, who the TV coverage, they did flick to him a few times, didn't they, as he sort of made his progress to the field. We saw him catch up to the back of that sort of battle that was Aldeguer, the two Grassini bikes, Lopez, obviously also Canet as well. So that 5-rider scrap, we saw him close up to the back of them. And then all of a sudden, out the last corner, Bo Benschneider's third. It was crazy, wasn't it? I think Canet had a lot to do with that, with some of his passing attempts on the last lap. But he just came from nowhere, didn't he, Bo Benschneider, take his first podium? Yeah,
it was you were watching the two drag racing to the line, and then the camera just kind of pans to the final corner, and Bo Benschneider just comes out of the smoke, and you're kind of like, what happened to the last 3 corners there that we've missed? But they did show a replay of Canet, who was completely over the limit on the last lap, into 12, runs straight on, picks up another rider, he runs off track, then into the next right-hander, into 13, absolutely clatters into the side of Fermin Aldeguer, taking them both out of, now they didn't crash, but basically ran them both wide and off the track enough that kind of really sold them out of the podium battle. And then, in fairness, Bo Benschneider did manage to pass into the final corner, put a move on Jeremy Alcoba, and that was
the last corner that he did that.
Yeah, it was the last corner he managed to somehow do it because he came out of the penultimate behind him, and that was into the final corner. Whether
Alcoba
made a mistake or went defensive, maybe had a moment, whatever, but he managed to do it in the final corner, which is no mean feat. So fantastic for him. He's looked good for a couple of years, but it's just kind of taken a while to get there. He's quite big. I always wonder, is his size too much of a disadvantage? But to be fair to him today, kind of his style of track, very physical, very kind of just demanding on the body. A taller rider usually can use their leverage a bit more, but hats off to him. Great result.
Yeah, it's nice to see Bo because he's not had the easiest time. Obviously, in Moto 3, he showed some signs of brilliance, but was too big. Got moved up to Moto 2. He's been on some pretty poor machinery. I think once he had a bit of like shrapnel basically from the engine go through his leg. Like, I'm pretty sure the engine sort of exploded and sent something through his leg and broke his leg once. I think that was on an NTS, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. So he's not had it easy. And he showed some signs of promise last year. Wasn't quite able to deliver on them, but yeah, it's great to see that he has managed to actually deliver that one. And he also did a nice tribute to his granddad, who apparently had died a couple of days ago. So yeah, it's wonderful for him to be on the podium to sort of do that tribute. But moving on to MotoGP now, of course, we will start with the sprint. A little bit less entertaining than the last couple of sprints, a little bit less crazy, but that is what you get with the circuit of the Americas. And it was a bit of a surprising weekend in terms of some of the performance for the riders, but the Yamaha, Fabio Quartararo, actually looked to make a good start for once. His qualifying wasn't too bad, but again, we saw the same thing, getting blasted by Ducatis on the straight, stuck in a pack, and then down he went at turn 1. It was a bit of a shame for Quartararo, but then you get the commentator saying his lap times are good as Bagnaia. So what's going on with Yamaha here?
Well, it's your typical Yamaha performance of, unless they can qualify first and get out a second lead on the opening lap, they're not going to win anything this year, really, because Pecco gets out to the lead. Fabio gets nowhere near him early, and he gets a good start in fairness, makes best of what he can do. Ends up crashing after being passed by a Ducati, no surprise. Then drops to last, and it apparently matches Pecco's lap times with a damaged M1. So again, I believe that it's when the Yamaha is near another rider, their mentality is so broken that they're like, oh, he's going to pass me straight, I got to brake late, that they don't even use their strong points when they're in the fight. It's like they use just weak point as their strong point when they're near other bikes. They try to brake late, they don't release the brake early and try and take this corner speed to break a small gap away. Like when he got passed by Martin, he just gave everything. He was braking so late to try and keep up with him, and then the crash came, which wasn't a surprise. Just slid off the inside, tried to save it, but just kept going, and it just slid away from him. Frankly, the way Yamaha are at, they're not going to win anything this year, really, unless they'll have to get lucky and get to the front of the race by someone getting taken out, some sort of weird running off incident or whatever. They're not, unless they can qualify this year, they're not going to be winning races. They're not going to pass people. It's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of always been their struggle, is that they can't race the V4s, but now it seems like they just can't qualify at all, so it really puts them in a position, because I mean, we were saying earlier that Fabio qualified not too badly and got a good start. I mean, the 7th place, it's not that great. Like, compared to what he's been doing the rest of the year, it is really good, but yeah, it's kind of shows you where Yamaha are at in terms of qualifying when we're saying that 7th is a good result. But on the other side of the spectrum then, we had Pecco Bagnaia. Obviously, his main race didn't quite go to plan, but we all talk about the sprint, so we'll cover that first. Pole position, new lap record at Kota. Really, everything seems to be going well for him. Got a good start. Rins did pass him very briefly, but then he turned on the Ducati power, and poor old Rins, bless him, didn't stand a chance as he blasted past him. And then he pushed to try and keep it with Bagnaia, but obviously he just couldn't do it with everyone being on the limit in the sprint, and Bagnaia just came home to dominate the race. But yeah, it was another outstanding performance from Pecco. Not really much more to say about it than that. I don't know if you have anything to add, but it just was typical Pecco performance. Managed to get to the lead and just sort of managed it from the front. Yeah,
that was pretty much it. There wasn't the only question mark was what could Rins do, and when he kind of got about the second half ahead of him, that was kind of it. No one else could touch him. The only people you'd imagine that would be quick enough probably other Ducatis, but there was no one in immediate danger to him, so he kind of had a comfortable enough race. And in fairness, didn't make any mistakes, brought it home, bang, another one over the bar.
Yeah, kind of bounced back almost from Argentina at that point, obviously with the crash in the main race, obviously with the sprint race being the next race after, kind of returned to the form that we saw of him at Portimao. Now, also in that race, we had a couple of manufacturers that have not been doing too well this season, doing pretty well. We had the Honda, obviously Alex Rins managed to qualify quite well and was doing a very good job there. Obviously made a couple of mistakes, but overall was doing quite well. But Brad Binder as well didn't have too bad of a sprint. I think Miller struggled a little bit more in the sprint, but Brad seemed to get another good start once again, which is not exactly a surprise. It seems to be, if he can get a good start in the sprint, he can kind of stay there. The bike is good enough to actually stay there for the short sprint, but doesn't seem to quite be there for the long races yet.
Yeah, it was a nice performance from KTM again. It looks like Jack's start wasn't great, and I think he fought his way back, but it was just ran out of laps. Brad is always just magnificent in the opening kind of sector. He just makes up so many positions. Brave, is risky, and he does everything he needs to get his KTM there. And he's just a very good race rider. He can just manage his races quite well. So even if he doesn't have the race pace of P5, he can still kind of hold on and just make his way in there and kind of get his elbows out. So we'll be saying a lot about KTM this year because of Binder's sprint races, but I still think in a long race it looks like maybe Jack might just have a bit more over him in the full feature length race, so it'll be interesting to see how that develops throughout the season.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad shot, because I think, to be honest, Miller's pace is better. I think Binder is just more aggressive and can make it work more in the opening lap, so the sprint format probably suits Binder more. I mean, in fairness, Miller, I guess, has kind of been at the front of races. He's been on a good bike that's there week in, week out. He knows how to sort of approach the race weekend, I guess. He knows how to approach the main race, whereas Binder, in fairness, all of his wins have been in quite weird circumstances generally. So maybe he's not really quite fully tuned in how to balance the bike throughout the race. It's more just his aggression is what makes it there. But I guess we'll see how that little teammate rivalry pans out throughout the rest of the season. We'll move on to the main race now. And we were just talking about how good Pecco was in the sprint race, but he reverted to type in the long race. That's 2 long races in a row now. He's crashed out of a good position. 45 points down the drain. Definitely echoes of last year, it must be said. Crashing out of, unforced, I guess, in Argentina. In fairness, in this time, he was forced into the mistake by having the pressure of Alex Rins behind him. But as the world champion on the best bike, when you've just dominated the sprint race, a bit of a needless error, don't you think?
Yeah, I think I'd actually be doing quite well in this championship if I was there, because there's so many riders who are underperforming, making mistakes. This, you could see this year being a 2006 or 2020 season where the consistent rider, he wasn't the quickest throughout the year. He could just about do it if someone could be consistent throughout the whole season. You could see someone doing that. So at the moment, there's no question of Pecco's speed, but he looks afraid to make a mistake, and he keeps making them. Now, the Argentina on the team have come out and said he didn't do anything really different. He didn't do anything outrageous. It was just one of those things where, unfortunately, in the rain, he just slipped off. In this one, they were doing ridiculous pace. It goes very early. Again, I wonder if it was tire temperature. Like, it's quite hot in Texas. They were putting a ridiculous pace on. And yeah, it just tips in. I reckon, again, this is another small incident where we didn't get a perfectly good angle of it. We got the onboards and we got like a panning shot from a helicopter from a different angle. So it's very hard to see. But I believe he is a touch wide, which going through that corner, turn 2, is notorious for tucking the front. It's been one of those crash corners for many years now on the calendar where you know you're going to get crashes. So just like, he probably doesn't do much wrong really, but he's just slightly over what will be the limit for the race. He's probably just taking too much out of his tyre. Shouldn't be making the mistakes, but when I heard the bike crash and I just saw in like the little window up the top of the screen that he was gone, I wasn't surprised. I was kind of just thinking, like, yeah, he's still not over his demons really, and there's still a lot to learn. And for someone who came into last year saying that he's going to use Valentino's greatest strength, which was like his mental strength on the track, clearly is nowhere near what Valentino could do on to his opponents. And he had a massive bike advantage over the guy behind him. He probably had speed advantage, What was the worst that Rins was going to do? Overtake him and probably hold him up for 5 laps? Towards the end of the race, you'd imagine Pecco would have had a lot more than Rins if he stayed upright. But I think Pecco is still, like, in his head, is petrified for what happened at Le Mans, where he got caught and then instantly just buckled. When he got passed into turn 1 at Saxony, buckled. I think he thinks if he's been passed that he's losing it, and he just tries too hard. He needs to take a step back and just try to, I don't know how many times we've said this on this podcast, he just needs to rule out these mistakes. It is understandable to make the mistakes when you're under the utmost pressure, but you know the guy behind you is not going to be there all year. So what if he takes 5 points off you? It's a long championship. He's not a rival. You do not need to beat him. Never again, you will be much quicker than him for the rest of the race. You just need to have better race management. Unfortunately, Ducati have gotten their Lorenzo-esque rider, but they have not gotten the Rossi mentality that they needed with it. He's a bit mentally weak, and unfortunately we keep seeing these incidents, and to be honest, it will continue until I actually don't know what's going to change, because right now he's not under immense pressure. He's making these mistakes himself. He's not racing a Rossi or a Marquez. If he was, he'd be absolutely shredded in media, like all these mistakes. So I don't know, it's going to be, he needs to take a step back to go forward. It sounds easy, obviously, but he has to work a lot on himself to rule these mistakes out, because he's thrown away too many points, regardless, even if the mistakes are little and very, very hard to rectify.
Yeah, it just seems to be a trait in Bagnaia. I don't think he'll ever stop doing it, to be honest, because basically you go back to the first race of his MotoGP career. I don't know if he fell off in that one, to be fair, but if you just talk about his whole MotoGP career, he's always had a crash in him in the race. Remember back to 2020 when he was leading at Misano, massive lead, completely unforced error, crashed out of the lead, did it several times. He also did it in 2021 at the same track. All right, in fairness, he was under pressure there from Marc Marquez, and obviously there was the whole championship thing, so fair enough, perhaps that got to him a little bit. We saw so many times in 2022. I mean, the fact he almost lost that championship with 8 victories was, testament in itself. He should never have been anywhere near losing that championship. Then it seems to start again here, because 2 races, if we're being harsh, 2 races out of 3 he's fallen off of. Okay, you could say 2 races out of 6 because it's sprint races, but if you're talking about full races where there's 25 points up for grabs, he's thrown 45 of them away already. And again, it's just one of those things where in Argentina, it was a wet race. It can happen. I don't think really being too harsh on him there. And again, I guess here it's a strange track, but you can also look at the same point. He picked up the maximum points in the sprint. He's been the quickest rider. He's got Alex Rins behind him, who is probably not going to be there for the rest of the season. It was a weird track, weird circumstances, a track that he goes really well at, and he was there pressuring him. And fair play to Rins, because Rins did the Rossi thing. Like you were talking about the Rossi mentality. That's the Rossi mentality, to really push your rival into a mistake by pushing the pace on or applying that pressure from behind. And that's what Rins did perfectly. And I think Rins is really underrated in his actual ability to force mistakes out of people, because he's forced mistakes out of 2 of the best riders ever to do it, Marquez and Rossi, in the past in similar scenarios. And he's done it to Bagnaia today. All right, and granted, Rossi and Marquez didn't crash when they made their mistakes, but they made mistakes that ultimately helped Rins out when he was applying pressure to them. So, yeah, it's just a great trait of Rins. But, yeah, I don't know about Bagnaia. Again, he could have perhaps let those points go. In fairness, Rins had an amazing pace, because they were running very similar pace to the sprint race, in a race where there was a lot of tyre wear, so fair play to them. But, yeah, so I can see why Bagnaia probably crashed, because they were going really, really hard, really quick. But it could have been one of those things where he could have just accepted he was going to lose to him, but he probably thought in his head that he was quicker than Rins and that he should be pulling away from him. I think that's ultimately what it was. Probably because he dominated the race the day before, dominated qualifying. He just thought, well, I should be quicker than this guy. I should be pulling away more. Kept pushing until the mistake occurred, perhaps. I don't really know, but yeah, he definitely needs to take a look at himself. But again, like you say, we've said this so many times, and it clearly doesn't work. He makes the same mistakes time and time again. He's just got to make sure that he wins the races where he doesn't crash, because it seems to be enough at the moment. But yeah, he's not leading the championship currently, even despite winning most of the races this year so far. I guess if you look at who's won the most, it's definitely going to be him. He's won 3. If you count both the sprint races, he's won as well. So yeah, definitely needs to try and get rid of it. But like I said, I just don't see it happening. But then the other championship rival of the previous year, Fabio Quartararo, he did the opposite. He crashed in the sprint and did a better race in the full length race. A decent race for Quartararo, finally getting on the box. Got a good start like he did previously. I think maybe learned from his mistakes of the race before, but also was in a better position. He was further ahead of Marini for quite a bit of that race, so he didn't have a Ducati right behind him for a lot of the race. He was up to fourth pretty quickly. I think Marini made a mistake on the opening lap, and I think he passed him. And he had a bit of a gap, so he didn't have a Ducati right behind him. He didn't have a Ducati in front of him. He had a bit of a gap to Miller, who obviously crashed out in the end. So, yeah, he had a bit more clear air, ran a bit of a better race, and once he got away with the leaders, that was it. He's shown that he's got the pace still. It's just every other race so far, he's got stuck in the mid-pack.
He still showed that he has the pace, but he's also racing. Now, again, there is no slow riders, but he's racing, what would you say, a third-tier Ducati in Marini, in terms of you go factory,
yeah,
probably
GP22, I guess.
Yeah, so he's racing as that.
Still
he's racing
his bike, though, probably.
100%, but if you look at kind of your levels where you'd imagine if he wants to win the World Championship, he needs to beat Bagnaia, Bastianini on the best that they have, not the guy that's on last year's bike in the third-tier team, essentially. He also lost out to a second-tier Honda. So, again, Pecco crashed, Bastianini's at home, Marquez is at home, Miller crashed. You kind of get the team that's P7 there already if you kind of put in the riders that are kind of already ahead of him on pace. Now, nothing away from him, brilliant performance. He kept Rins honest. But like you could easily see this race have been like for P8. Rins did a great performance to come on P8. Fabio just didn't have the pace to catch him, got past, and ended up coming 10th and really comes 9th. That could be what you could see next weekend. The three boys again going at it, but they're not going at it for the win. They're going at it for 9th, 10th and 8th. So the way GP is these days, there is no kind of set script. You turn up each week, you don't know what's going to happen, and to be fair, as a viewer and as a neutral, it is great to watch. We get the sprint races, they're a bit mad. In terms of Yamaha, they still have speed, they just don't have enough in a hand that they can make the difference where they're strong. There's a famous saying from Senna, you don't override or overdrive or you're quick. It's where you're weak you need to focus on, and unfortunately Yamaha have too many weaknesses. Their strength is not the Rossi era, the Lorenzo era of massive corner speed, such good electronics, amazing drive out of the corner that they could do what they needed over one lap and then do it for the race ahead of the V4s or whatever it would have been. Currently, he can't do it over one lap. He can't really do it in the race unless he is given this kind of bubble where he has 2 seconds in front, 2 seconds back, a bit of clear air, tyre pressures are okay. It's too small of a little pinhole of a window where Fabio is able to operate that Yamaha. Even on the podium, he's interviewed by Simon Crayfart. He was complaining about no grip, no acceleration, no top end. Said he was very happy. He kind of felt like he was saying he was kind of more happy with his own performance. He thanked the team, but like he wasn't happy. Like you could see it was kind of through a gritted teeth that he was kind of saying all these words. So they've a long road ahead, but they still show that they on their day they can still produce a decent bike.
Yeah, I guess it's all about that really. Like you say, obviously he got beat by second-rate bikes, but this is a weird track where Bagnaia crashed, picked up 16 points of Bagnaia, so ultimately not too bad. I know he lost, I guess, 12 the day before, so really he's only gained like 4 on him. But you know, it's but then also I suppose the disappointment would be, you know, last year you're thinking Bagnaia crashed out of a race, Quartararo's going to be one to win that race, but yeah, he's doing the best with what he got. Obviously, we were really happy last weekend at Argentina to see that Morbidelli seemed to be, you know, finally finding his stride. He pretty much had Quartararo covered that weekend, but it seems that was a fluke. It's not transferred into the this weekend. He was miles ahead of the other bike again. So again, you can't really say he could get any more out of the bike because clearly, as he showed in the sprint, he was already riding on the limit. But speaking of another rider that, to be fair, has been outperforming the rest of the guys on the same bike as him, Vinales on the Aprilia. Very interesting start for him. I don't know what happened. I don't know if you know what really happened, but it was a terrible start. Yeah, went absolutely backwards and then sort of sived his way through. Again, helped out by obviously some of the crashes. The Leish crashed early on, didn't he? That was obviously a position. Miller crashed, Bagnaia crashed. So he got a few positions from that, but then he fought his way. Did he finish fourth in the end, Vinales?
Yep, P4.
Yeah, so he fought his way back up to fourth, which, in fairness, is pretty good for Vinales because he's not known as a guy that's particularly great at coming back when he's had these bad starts. So it's good to see. He actually does go pretty well at Kota, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a track that he is fairly decent at. But even still, it was a good recovery ride, but strange start for Vinales.
Yeah, his 2 race starts. One was his own error race in the sprint race. That was human error. The second one was the bike just not cooperating. They have some sort of gremlins in the launch. It's been an issue for Maverick more than Aleix. Aleix looks like he can get around it, but I think with a slightly weaker mind of Maverick, I think it plays on him more, and I think the more he dwells on it, the worse it gets for him. He went backwards in the sprint race, and just with the sprint didn't have time to come back through. But in the full length race, you did mention the rider that fell off, but in fairness, he actually still overtook 6-7 riders to get back to P4, so it was a really good showing for him. I was quite happy that he had made it back. And at one point, I think about 3-4 laps ago, Fabio ran slightly on at turn 12 just off track, and the gap dropped to about 2.1 seconds, and I thought 3 laps, maybe he could do it, and the Aprilia would have the legs on the Yamaha to probably make a move into turn 12, but I think Fabio squared off the corner and I managed to pick up the pace for the last few laps. But impressive from Vinales, top Aprilia, as you would imagine, being probably the highest paid in the factory team. Teammates struggling. He did a good sprint race, Aleix, but in the opening race crashed lap 1 in that stupid turn 12. He literally crashed exactly on the tarmac that we talked about so much. And it was just a shame because you see him tip off in the background and you already know that he's just lost the front on the kind of ripply, rubbered out track that is just Kota, and unfortunately that was exactly it. We got a replay from the rider behind and you just see him just cross over this kind of grainy, gravelly looking tarmac that you wouldn't even look at on a footpath, and he just crosses over, and just as he regains grip on the normal tarmac, the front goes. End of his race. He almost saved it, but unfortunately that was that. And yeah, Vinales is definitely the best Aprilia out there at the moment. It'll be interesting to see what we can get from Miguel Oliveira when he's fully fit. But for now, Vinales just needs something at the start of the races again as usual. But he has good pace, which is quite interesting to see going forward.
Yeah, I think he's sort of picked up that number 1 mantle now.
Yeah,
I think Aleix has beat him in maybe a couple of the sprint races, but I think Vinales has been ahead in all of the main races so far. So. If I'm not mistaken. Obviously, I know Aleix did have an issue in Argentina. Obviously, fell off in Austin, but that's not really Vinales' fault. So, yeah. And I didn't mean to disparage him by saying those guys crashed. I was pointing out that those guys and he made all the other overtakes to get it. That's what got him onto 4th, because he probably would have been like 7th, I guess, if those guys were all in front. Although I don't have a feeling he probably would have beat Miller. Probably. I think Miller would have faded, but I guess we'll never see how that one plays out. But we have mentioned our race winner Rins a few times. Obviously, I was talking about his pressuring off Bagnaia, so probably won't spend too much time on him. But who saw that coming? If you said that you thought Rins was going to put it on the front row, put it on the podium in the sprint race, and then win the main race, you're a liar. Just because nobody thought that was going to happen. I mean, we all thought, Honda are going to win at Kota now that Marquez isn't there. But Rins did a Marquez performance, because I just can't figure out how he did it. I know Kota is a strange track, and the fact that he likes it obviously really elevated him. And they were saying in the race about his riding style. He seems to have been able to ride it with corner speed as well. Like, he's braking late but carrying corner speed. Maybe a bit more like how Quartararo's run the Yamaha to an extent. And he's sort of run the Honda that way. He obviously tries to carry as much corner speed as possible, brakes late. It seems to be working for him. And the other Hondas, all right, in fairness, one of them was Bradl, who's the test rider, who, bless him, just gets drafted in every time poor old Marquez is injured. But he was miles clear. I mean, all the other Hondas didn't finish, did they? They crashed. But even before they crashed, Rins was a class of his own. It was a Marquez-style performance. It was better than even what Quartararo did in comparison to Morbidelli, if you look at it like that.
Just before we touch on Rins, I just want to point out that Aleix and Raul Fernandez's crash in the main race was caused by a failed rear right height device. Just right there while you were speaking. Just said I'd want to put that in. So it's just kind of broken now. They've
had that before, haven't they? I think, because
I'm sure Maverick Vinales in Sachsenring last year cost him his first podium, correct? But to go forward,
Silverstone also, I don't think his ride out device went on.
Oh, I think that's also a big issue at the start. He can't activate the right out device, so it could be an overall a pretty issue there. But to move back onto Rins, I pose you the question, have Honda made a mistake assigning Rins to LCR and Mir to factory?
No, because if they want Rins to have the factory parts, they'll just take the engineers over to LCR. So it's still a Honda contract, so they are both HRC riders. I mean, Rins has been getting the Marquez parts, and I'm sure he has the Marquez engineers in his garage whilst Marquez is not here. So yes, I can see it in a way. And to be honest, I'm surprised because I think Rins actually is faster than Mir, but I expected Mir to do better on the V4 than Rins. But it seems like Rins is doing better at the moment, and fair play to him. But I can see what you mean by that. Is it a mistake to have hired Mir? But I guess you've hired the world champion. You've got both of them under HRC contracts. So yeah, I don't think it's too bad, because if they decide that they want to put some more resources towards Rins, they can. They've done it in the past, like when Marquez has been injured, like Nakagami got all of his crew and stuff like that. And obviously in the past, when Cal Crutchlow was winning races in the Cecchinello team, he started getting parts. But I think he started getting priority over Pedrosa by the end. So yeah, I think I can see what you mean, but no, I don't think so, because I think they'll funnel the resources towards Rins. But I'm interested to know what you think to that.
When they both were signed, I agreed with the decision, because I think Mir is overall the more complete package than Rins. Again, mainly because Rins is so underrated, so you don't think of him as a high rated rider as you would with Mir, because of the two championships, Moto3 and GP. A lot of people who I would politely say are probably not as invested in the sport or as knowledgeable in the sport go, why did Mir get the factory over Rins? Rins is better, and kind of that kind of bar pub talk where it's like, oh well, Rins is way better, like he's won more races and all this. I always look at kind of the data. You always hear how good technically Mir is. He was immense in Moto3. Very good in his debut season in Moto2. I think he's a more complete rider. I also thought he would have done better on a V4 than Rins, but it looks like, again, no, right? I just want to stress that Texas is, you might as well racing on the moon. There's no form book here. It's
aside from the fact that Rins goes really well there.
Except, it's kind of, there's no form book with bikes is what I should say. Again, no, even on another Honda.
He's won on every bike he's ever been on there now.
Exactly. There's riders that can excel at tracks like this. He's very good at this particular track. Is it going to be it's going to be very interesting to see how this progresses throughout the season between two HRC riders, one in the full singing and dancing Repsol Honda seat, and one in the Luca Cecchinello racing team as the kind of backup rider, would say. The fact that he's already got a front row, got a podium in this sprint race, and won a race in his first 3 rounds, we'll say. We can't even say 3 races anymore. It just shows how well he's adapted to it. Now, I know all of them came in this round where he is a good rider. I still think I'm on the fence, you see, because I'm starting to understand why people think that Rins should have gotten the factory seat. It's hard to answer. I still think for now Mir will come good. I just think that he's had a tough 22 season. He's had a bad start to this year. He's had injuries, and I think he's just not gelling with that bike. And I think the big issue is that you've Rins coming from an inline 4 who's probably, how many years have people been saying they'd love to see Rins on an M1? He had that kind of lovely corner speed style, very nice flowing riding style, as if he could extract that high corner speed. Going to V4, you kind of expect him to struggle like he did in testing, and he did in the opening rounds, and especially compared to a Marquez who knows how to ride that bike. Mir, who
didn't do that bad in the opening rounds.
He didn't do bad.
His were 10th and 9th. It's not too
to
bad.
Be fair, they weren't too bad, but there were kind of results where he stayed rubber side down where others didn't gain a few positions. Sure. His pace was never immense, whereas obviously this weekend he actually was there on genuine pace. But you'd still think that Mir would just grasp that opportunity more. It's going to be interesting as it's gone, but for now, I think Mir just needs some time. Injuries. I think he needs a good result. He's had no good results. He crashed with Fabio in the opening round in the sprint. Big crash. Argentina crashes again a couple of times this weekend. Doesn't seem to have the 1 lap pace. Everything about him looks like his riding style is more like Mark. It's just seeming to be a lot of negatives at the moment for him. I do like Mir, and I hope he can turn around, but for now, Rins is making him look silly.
Yeah. Mir's shown up in a few sessions, to be fair. But I think he is on a bit of a bad run of form. And we've seen this happen quite a few times now. in the past that you get stuck in the Honda hurt loop. You just keep getting hurt by the Honda and you just lose confidence. And yeah, it doesn't really work out for you. So I'm hoping that he can try and bounce back from it. Just trying to think of what tracks he's good at. I don't know off the top of my head any mere special tracks, but I'm sure there is some.
Austria.
Yes, Austria, which on a V4 probably is a bit easier than inline 4. So we'll be waiting a while for that one, unfortunately. But I guess we'll see when we get there. But hopefully Mir will be able to pick up, because it's nice to see the Honda's doing a bit better. Maybe the bike can improve, because apparently Rins is a fantastic development rider. So if he's now getting a bit of direction now that Mark's not here, it'll be interesting to see if the bike does improve, because I'm not sure Mark is necessarily the best development rider.
Usually the most naturally talented rider ever usually the most naturally talented one. Exactly, the Stoner, the Marcus kind of syndrome, you could say. Yeah,
I think it's definitely interesting. I mean, to be honest, I think they could do with it with an overall rejig. I don't know if I've already said it before, but I'm not particularly like on the Stefan Bradl bandwagon either. I think he's a nice guy and a good rider, but the bike's not really been very good since he started being a test rider. So you maybe need, I mean, to be honest, shell out a bit of money and get Pedrosa back. I think that'd be a good move. But we'll move on now to obviously the second place finisher, Luca Marini. Technically his first podium in MotoGP, because the sprint podiums don't count in the statistics as actual Grand Prix podiums. So as such, his first podium. Continuing the good form of the R46, obviously his teammate won the last race. He picks up P2 here, his first podium. A pretty good ride, in fairness. Obviously he came through, caught Quartararo. Didn't ever really look like he's going to trouble Rins, to be honest. I don't know if he maybe took a couple of tenths out of him, but then I think Rins was managing at that point. As soon as he saw Pecco go down, I think Rins was sort of managing the race, because, again, he's got very good race management and racecraft. Like, ever since he had that spate of crashes, I'm talking about Rins again. I'm supposed to be on about Marini. We'll go back to Marini. So yeah, Marini did a great job. He's been improving slowly. He's a bit of a slow burner, isn't he, Marini? We've seen that in the lower classes. 2021 wasn't really very good. He got the front row. I think that was about the only notable thing he did that year. 2022, he sort of built himself up as Mr. Consistent, stay on the bike, had a few good results there and there. And then now this year, he's hit the ground running, testing. I'm pretty sure he topped all the tests.
Yeah, or Valencia last year and then all the...
Yeah, he topped at least one day on each test anyway. Whether he topped overall, I'm not 100% sure, but he was looking good. He seems to have taken that form. Good at Argentina, good here. So good to see, because there are some strange tracks where you could, especially as a slightly inexperienced rider. I know he's done 2 full seasons, but even still, that's probably on the lower side compared to some of the other guys that have crashed out today in front of him. So yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about him, because he had a clean start. He made a bit of a mistake in the sprint, I believe, off the start, and he sort of learnt from it. So yeah, it's a good race, wasn't it, from Marini?
Yeah, absolutely delighted from when he did pass Quartararo. He had about 2 laps where he took, between the 2 laps, about 0.7 off of Rins, but I think Rins then just responded, because it looks like Rins then took about 0.6 back in one whole lap. So it looked like Rins was very comfortable with Quartararo there. Threw in Marini pushes the pace on, gaps the Yamaha by about half a second, and then it just forces Rins into a response. So Rins just covered him off, just kind of made him think that even you pushing, I can kind of just match you enough to get to the end. But you have to say, after the opening round he had, where he crashed so much, took out the other Ducatis, had such a bad round, you could easily see a rider drop his head there after having such a good pre-season, everything going his way, and then come to the first round and it just falls apart. Was good in the wet last time out, was good pretty much throughout the whole weekend, was up in the podium positions again last week, obviously got pipped a few times. This week, very good, very consistent, as you'd imagine from it. It's just great to see the both for your 46 there, because you kind of, my worry was that with Bezzecchi making so many steps, that Marini could just fall back into the shadows a small bit, but again, just shows that he is coming along nicely, and his consistency is key. And it was just good seeing again up there, because being Valentino's half brother throughout his careers, he's been asked a lot of questions about whether he deserves it. He's only there because of his brother, just down there, and I kind of think he's kind of getting that monkey off his back, that he's gotten the podium, he's gotten a couple of front rows. He just is the GP full GP package now, and I think he can push on, and there should be some more podiums from this year.
Yeah, I think it's good. It seems like this year, both of the brothers, you know, Marini and Alex Marquez,
Yeah.
I think they've kind of shown that they definitely merit themselves in MotoGP. Not that they hadn't before, but, you know, people always ask those questions. I think they've shown this year that they stand on their own, put them on a good bike, they'll bring home some good results. Now, obviously, we've spoke about it being a pretty attritional race throughout. So we've listed off plenty of riders that have crashed. I think, obviously, every Honda rider crashed. I can't believe, well, every Honda rider except Rins, crashed, which I say I can't believe. I think we've seen that actually happen quite a few times in the last few years. Just shows how hard that bike is to ride. Obviously, we spoke about Miller crashed. Actually, both KTMs crashed, didn't they? Because Binder crashed as well, didn't he?
Yeah, and rejoined, though, because he finished P13.
He did rejoin, yeah, but he crashed. Actually, that's an interesting note. He made that very desperate sort of pass on Zarco, then ran off the track, and then 2 corners later fell off. He was definitely pushing over the limit. Binder was
not very Binder,
almost like
really.
a character. Yeah, it was strange. Obviously, we had the Aleix problem. I actually didn't even realize Ralph Fernandez had crashed, to be honest with you, until you said
he crashed and then retired, and we only saw him come into the pits. We never saw the crash.
And it's a ride height device issue. Hopefully, they can sort that out.
It's going on for about a year now, though. That's the fact that they had the issues in Sachsenring last year, so it's a bit worrying.
Yeah, it's not great. At least they haven't got the front devices to worry about anymore. It's just the rear ones, but even still, it's not an ideal situation, shall we say? But yeah, pretty attritional race. Lots of crashes, a couple of retirements. So, you got anything else to say about the race overall? Because it was actually quite interesting. The sprint was rather dull in a way, but the actual main race was pretty interesting.
I hope we find another venue for the USA GP, really, is the main thing. That's the main conway for this whole week, regardless of all the mistakes in Moto 3, Moto 2 and GP, the sprint race. A lot of them you can tie back to the track conditions. It's a great facility. The track itself isn't bad. It's just the condition of the track and the lack of kind of care from the owners. I'd love to go back to Indianapolis. Everyone brings up, why don't go back to Luna Seca? It's not possible. Even in 2012 when we were in 2013 when we were going there, it was a bit sketchy. I'm not gonna lie. Them bikes were getting a bit too quick even back then. At the last 10 years, the bikes have come on leaps and bounds. It would be. It's not even worth imagining going back to Laguna. I had actually a weird idea today because Laguna back in the day, because I had such a small pit, you only had the GP paddock there, no Moto 3 or 125 and 250s back in the day. I had an idea. Sack GP off for a week, just send Moto 3 and Moto 2 to Laguna Seca, leave them battle there. That was my idea for a race weekend. So that's our new USA GP in my eyes.
Yeah, they should do that. I mean, there's been these rumours lately that they're looking to do MotoGP and F1 at the same weekend, and I imagine that would mean sacking Moto 2 and Moto 3 off. So send Moto 2 and Moto 3 off to Laguna on their own, send MotoGP off somewhere to race with F1. Problem solved.
That would be pretty terrible if F1 and GP.
Oh yeah, I'm not on board with that idea, but
completely against it as well.
Yeah. I remember it got mentioned once a few months ago, but it seems to be picking up traction. But maybe that's something we'll do a completely separate podcast on at some point, because there'll probably be some outlandish comments from somebody high up on one of the sports talking about that at some point that we'll have to discuss. But that's it then for the USGP. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you are listening on Spotify, do rate us 5 stars. And if you are watching the video on Dill's channel, give him a like as well. Really does help out in both algorithms. But we'll see you next time for the Spanish GP at Jerez. Going to Europe now for, well, I suppose we've already been in Europe, but the European leg of the season where things are a bit more normal, as people say. But let's see how chaotic that race turns out to be either way. But we'll see you in the next one.